Jenna's house always had this picture-perfect vibe. The dim lighting, the soft music in the background, and that faint smell of roses mixed with expensive candles. It all felt warm, inviting, yet strangely artificial, like it was set up for a movie scene. Tonight, though, it was Sophia's idea to come. I could have listed 1,000 reasons not to, but she'd been insistent. "Come on, Liam," she had said earlier, adjusting her earrings in front of the mirror. "You've been working nonstop. You need this. We need this." She looked incredible, of course. The silky green dress hugged her in all the right ways, her hair cascading down her back with effortless elegance, and her makeup was the kind that made it clear she knew exactly how stunning she looked. I noticed. Naturally, I noticed. But somehow, the words I wanted to say got tangled up somewhere between the pile of work emails and endless meetings. I figured I didn't have to tell her every time I noticed how good she looked. At least, I thought she already knew. As we entered the party, I straightened my collar and forced a smile. The music hummed at just the right volume, loud enough to encourage some chatter. Jenna greeted us with that over-the-top enthusiasm, the kind that made it hard to tell if she was genuinely excited or just filling the space with energy. "Hey, you made it!" she exclaimed, pulling Olivia into a tight hug. "And Liam, good to see you." Mason appeared at my side, slapping me on the back with too much enthusiasm. "How's the grind, man? Still married to the job?" He grinned like he'd just cracked a joke, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on Olivia a little too long. "More like married to stress," I muttered, trying to keep the bitterness from seeping through. Olivia drifted off, laughing and joining a conversation with Jenna. She was the life of the party. Meanwhile, I stood there, trying to keep up with small talk that I didn't really care about. Mason leaned in again, lowering his voice. "You too good?" he asked. "Yeah, just the usual stuff," I said, brushing him off. But Mason didn't buy it. He shot me a look, one of those knowing glances that made me feel like he could read me better than I could. "You sure?" I didn't answer. He wasn't wrong. Things between Olivia and me had been off for a while, but I wasn't about to unpack that here. Especially not at this party. I tried to lose myself in the noise and the crowd, but my eyes kept drifting to Olivia. She looked at ease, maybe a little too at ease, laughing with Jenna and a few other guests. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. After all, it was just a party. But then Dylan showed up. I'd only met him a couple of times, but I didn't need to know him well. You could tell right away that he was one of those guys who had charm that made you feel inferior just by being near him. He had that perfect smile and that aura of confidence that was just too smooth to be real. "Hey, Olivia, show me how to dance." Dylan's voice sliced through the chatter like a knife. I froze, gripping my drink a little too tightly as Olivia laughed, tilting her head with that soft, inviting gesture. "Sure," she said, not even bothering to look my way. I felt my chest tighten as they headed to the dance floor. Dylan's hand slid a little too naturally around her waist. Mason, who'd been watching quietly, leaned in once more. "Relax, man. It's just a dance," he said. I gave him a look but didn't say anything. It was easier to pretend I didn't care than admit the truth. Olivia and Dylan moved together like they'd done it 1,000 times. Their bodies synced effortlessly, like they were a pair of dancers who'd been practicing for years. Dylan leaned in, whispered something in her ear, and she threw her head back laughing, genuinely laughing. In a way I hadn't seen in months. That was the breaking point. I crossed the room, doing my best to act casual, but my heart was pounding. "Hey, Olivia, care to dance with your husband?" She glanced at me with a smile that was all too amused, the kind that made it clear she knew exactly what she was doing. "Later, babe. I'm showing Dylan some moves." It wasn't just her words that stung. It was the way she said them, as if I were an afterthought. I stood there, trying not to let the humiliation show on my face, while Dylan shot me that smug grin guys like him always had ready. I turned away, forcing myself to stay composed. Mason followed me to the bar, his presence oddly reassuring yet still irritating. "You good?" he asked, though we both knew the answer. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, but I wasn't. I watched them from across the room, my stomach churning with every sway of Olivia's hips. She was dancing like a different person, like someone I didn't even know. Dylan leaned in closer, his hand moving lower on her back, and I felt something inside me crack. Ava, one of Collins's colleagues, sidled up to me, her expression sympathetic. "She's not thinking straight," she murmured. "You know how she gets when she feels ignored." I didn't answer. What was there to say? She wasn't wrong, but hearing it from someone else just made it sting more. "Just don't do anything stupid, okay?" Ava squeezed my arm briefly before vanishing into the crowd. I stood there, swirling the last of my whiskey, trying to make sense of everything. It wasn't just the dance that bothered me. It was what it represented. This wasn't innocent flirting. It was something deeper, something dangerous. Dylan whispered something else in her ear, and she gave him that slow, deliberate smile that made my stomach drop. Right then, I knew. This wasn't just about her feeling neglected or having a bad night. Something between us had shifted, and there was no going back. I set my empty glass on the bar, feeling cold resolve settle in. If this was the game she wanted to play, then I was ready to play too. The morning after the party, the house was eerily quiet, like the calm before a storm. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, and there was Olivia, lying next to me, scrolling through her phone with a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I couldn't see the screen, but I didn't need to. I could feel it, Dylan. I could tell by the way her body stiffened and then relaxed, like whatever she was reading was making her happy in a way she didn't want to share. I rolled over, staring at the ceiling, the events of last night replaying in my mind. It wasn't just the dance. It was the look on her face. She looked alive in a way I hadn't seen in months. I tried to convince myself it was just the alcohol or the party atmosphere, but then her phone buzzed again. I saw the flicker of excitement in her eyes before she quickly locked the screen. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, just Chloe," she replied quickly, almost too quickly, her smile forced and unnatural. I didn't push her any further, not yet, but I filed that moment away, storing it for later. The rest of the day passed in a haze of empty conversations and mundane tasks, but Olivia seemed to be somewhere else. She drifted through the house, like she was physically present but emotionally miles away. It was obvious she wasn't thinking about me. I saw it in the way her eyes kept darting toward her phone, waiting for something, anything, a message, a notification. That evening, we settled onto the couch, but it didn't feel like we were sharing a space. The movie on the TV was just background noise. I reached out for her hand, but she pulled it away as if it was an afterthought, making a show of adjusting the cushion. Her phone rested on the armrest, screen face down, but the faint buzz of incoming messages was impossible to ignore. She glanced at me quickly, her face blank, and I saw her turn off the vibration. "Everything okay?" I asked, my eyes focused on the screen to avoid her gaze. "Yeah, just tired," she muttered, shifting her position on the couch. I could tell she was lying. Her voice wasn't right, and I could feel the tension in the air. A few minutes later, she got up, claiming she needed something from the kitchen. I waited until I heard her footsteps fade away, then grabbed her phone. It was locked, of course, but I could still see the notifications. "Had a great time last night. When can we meet again?" Another one. "You're even better than I imagined." My stomach tightened into a knot. I put the phone back exactly how it was, forcing myself to stay calm. She wasn't just playing around anymore. This was something else, something worse. When she returned, she gave me a small, forced smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, like she was trying to cover up the truth. I pretended not to notice, but inside, everything was falling apart. The next morning, I left for work, but I couldn't focus on anything. All I could think about was the text I had seen. By the time I got home, I had decided. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. I needed more than just a hunch. I needed solid proof. Over the next few days, I kept a close watch. Olivia started leaving the house more often, always with a vague excuse that didn't add up. Her smile seemed strained, and when she wasn't with me, she was on her phone, texting rapidly, almost urgently. It was a side of her I hadn't seen before. One evening, I was pretending to read, but I couldn't concentrate. Then, I heard her laugh, soft and light, coming from the other room. It twisted something inside me. She wasn't laughing with me anymore. It didn't take long for her to slip up. Late one night, I overheard her talking on the phone when she thought I was asleep. Her voice was too soft, too intimate for a casual conversation. The next morning, I grabbed her phone again while she was in the shower. This time, the messages were crystal clear. How about coffee tomorrow? I'd love to see you again, Olivia. I don't know, Dylan. Come on, it'll be fun. Okay, but just coffee. Just coffee. I could almost hear her talking herself into it, trying to downplay it. It's just coffee. Just a casual conversation. It doesn't mean anything. But I knew better. The next day, Olivia said she was going to run errands. I knew exactly where she was headed. I followed her, keeping a safe distance. I wasn't surprised when she walked into a small cafe downtown. And there he was, sitting at a table in the corner, looking like he was waiting for her. They sat together for over an hour, talking and laughing. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. It was the way she leaned toward him, the way her hand brushed against his. They weren't just two people having coffee. They were two people on the edge of something dangerous. When she came back home, her face was flushed, and her eyes were brighter than they had been in weeks. She tried to act like everything was fine, but I could see the guilt in the way she moved. She hugged me, kissed my cheek, and said, "I missed you today." The lie came so easily, it made my skin crawl. At that moment, I knew this wasn't just a rough patch or a misunderstanding. Something had shifted between us, and it was too late to go back. I decided I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof. And when the time was right, I would have everything I needed to confront her. It started out small, as these things often do, little things I couldn't quite explain. More and more, Olivia began making excuses to leave the house. The reasons were always vague, never quite adding up. She started working late more often, coming home with that distracted energy, the kind you have when your mind is somewhere else, or with someone else. I tried to tell myself it was just stress from work, that I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Then she mentioned another event, this time with Dylan. He'd invited her to a pop-up art gallery opening downtown. "It's just a few people," she said casually, like it was no big deal. But the way her eyes lit up told me everything. The excitement she tried to hide, the smile she couldn't quite suppress. "You're seeing Dylan again?" I asked, doing my best to keep my voice neutral. "It's not a date, Liam," she snapped, brushing off my concern. "It's just some friends. He invited me, and I thought it'd be fun." "You didn't mention this before," I pressed, narrowing my eyes. "I didn't think I had to," she retorted sharply. "Do I need your permission to go out now?" Her words stung, cutting deep. I stood there, caught between anger and confusion, knowing there was no point in arguing anymore. She'd already made up her mind. Later that night, she rushed into the bedroom, pulling out clothes from the closet and getting dressed with more care than she had in months. Her perfume lingered in the air, the same scent that used to drive me crazy, but now it just made my stomach churn. "When will you be back?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Late," she replied, not bothering to look up. "Don't wait up." And with that, she was gone, leaving me standing alone in the bedroom, the silence pressing down on me. It wasn't the first time she'd gone out late, but tonight felt different. I tried to distract myself, TV, emails, anything, but my thoughts kept circling back to Dylan. I imagined them together, laughing, her hand brushing his. It felt effortless between them, in a way it hadn't in a long time between us. Around midnight, I couldn't take it any longer. I needed answers. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and stopped when I saw Jenna's name. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should get her involved, but I dialed anyway, before I could talk myself out of it. "Liam?" Jenna answered, her voice surprised. "Everything okay?" "Not really," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. "Listen, I know Olivia went to that art event with Dylan. Do you know where it is?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought Jenna might hang up. But then, she sighed. "It's at the gallery on 6th and Vine," she said reluctantly. "Liam, I don't know if this is a good idea. I just need to see for myself." I muttered, cutting her off. She didn't try to stop me. The drive downtown felt endless. Every red light, every slow-moving car seemed to stretch time, tightening the knot of anxiety in my chest. When I finally pulled up in front of the gallery, I sat in the car for a minute, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that I would walk in and find them with a group of people, just chatting, nothing more. But as soon as I stepped inside, the atmosphere hit me. Soft jazz in the background, the clink of wine glasses, and that sight I had been dreading. There she was, standing beside Dylan, her face bathed in the soft glow of the gallery lights. They weren't holding hands, but they might as well have been. Their bodies leaned toward each other, close and intimate. Olivia laughed at something Dylan said, and the sound hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze for a moment, my mind racing. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, storming in, demanding answers, making a scene. But now that I was here, all I felt was numb. I spotted Kaylee standing off to the side, sipping her wine and watching us with an unreadable expression. I walked toward her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Jenna," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "What the hell is going on?" She glanced up at me, eyes full of pity, and for a second, I hated her for it. "I tried to tell her this wasn't a good idea," she murmured. "Why didn't you stop her?" I demanded, my voice rising. "She's not someone you can stop, Liam," Jenna replied with a sigh. "You know that." I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my anger in check. I wanted to march over to Olivia, pull her away from Dylan, demand she explain herself. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever was going on between them had already gone too far. "She's not just flirting, is she?" I whispered, almost afraid to hear the answer. Jenna shook her head slowly. She didn't need to say more. It confirmed what I already knew in my gut. I stood there, watching my wife laugh and talk with another man, feeling like a stranger in my own life. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't how I imagined it would end. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely lost. And I knew, without a doubt, that things between Olivia and me would never be the same. The next party came around faster than I expected. This time, though, I was ready. I wasn't going to sit back and watch Olivia play her game with Dylan again. If she thought I would sit quietly while she flirted with him, she was in for a rude awakening. I had a plan. It was simple. If Olivia wanted attention, she was about to learn what it felt like to crave it and not get it. When we arrived, Jenna greeted us with her usual exuberance, ushering us inside with promises of good drinks and great company. But I wasn't focused on her or the crowd of familiar faces. My eyes scanned the room, searching for one person, Isabella. I had met her once, briefly, and she had stuck in my mind. Tall, blonde, and with an effortless confidence that turned heads without trying. She didn't fade into the background like most people. She stood out. And that's exactly what I needed tonight. I spotted her near the bar, dressed in a sleek black dress, holding a glass of champagne. She exuded self-assurance, the kind of woman who knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. I leaned toward Olivia, just close enough for her to hear, but far enough that she wouldn't suspect anything. "I'm going to grab a drink," I said casually. Olivia nodded absent-mindedly, her eyes already drifting toward Dylan. "Perfect." I made my way over to Isabella, gathering my thoughts before speaking. "Champagne suits you," I said with a grin as I approached her. She looked me up and down, her lips curling into a smile that was equal parts amused and intrigued. "And what suits you?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I chuckled, feeling the rush of playing a game I hadn't played in years. "I guess we'll find out." We talked for a while, and the conversation flowed easily. Isabella was sharp, funny, and engaging in a way that made me forget, even if just for a moment, why I was doing this. We laughed together, exchanged jokes, and I noticed eyes from across the room starting to lock onto us. Olivia was watching. Her smile faltered, just slightly, but enough for me to see. She stood next to Dylan, but her attention was locked on me. I could see the subtle tightness in her jaw, the flicker of resentment in her eyes. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to being the one left wondering. Good. Let her wonder. I turned my focus back to Isabella, leaning in a little closer, letting my hand brush against her arm as we laughed about something trivial. I could feel Olivia's stare burning into the back of my neck. A few minutes later, I glanced back in Olivia's direction. She had leaned into Dylan now, her hand resting too familiarly on his arm. I saw the smile she gave him. It was the kind of smile that tried too hard, desperate to regain her footing, to reclaim the attention she had so easily given away. But it wasn't working. Her moves were too obvious, too forced. Dylan seemed to notice the shift in the energy between us. His gaze flickered between Olivia and me, intrigued by the unspoken tension. He wasn't blind. He could tell there was more to this than just casual flirting. Meanwhile, Isabella soaked up the attention I gave her. Her laughter was light and genuine, and for the first time in a long while, I felt in control. I wasn't just standing on the sidelines anymore. I was right in the middle of it, pulling the strings. I saw Olivia whisper something to Dylan, trying to draw him in closer. Her body language shifted as she worked harder to make him pay attention. But Dylan wasn't biting, not fully. He was too busy enjoying the show, watching Olivia scramble while I basked in Isabella's attention. I wasn't sure if Dylan was actually interested in Olivia or just entertained by the drama unfolding around him. But it didn't matter. As the night wore on, I saw Olivia's frustration grow. She laughed too loudly at Dylan's jokes, leaned in too close, trying too hard to force a connection that wasn't there anymore. Meanwhile, I kept my pace steady with Isabella, chatting and flirting while Olivia stewed in her own jealousy. The tension between Olivia and me had become almost unbearable. It was as if we were two opponents in a silent battle, each of us trying to prove something to the other without saying a word. The strange dynamic was impossible to ignore. Dylan, ever the observer, seemed to relish the chaos between us. He kept playing along just enough to keep Olivia dangling, but he remained distant enough to watch her unravel, as if he were enjoying a front-row seat to the spectacle. Every so often, he'd glance my way, that sly smirk of his telling me he was aware of the game I was playing. It was maddening and, strangely, satisfying. For the first time in a long while, it wasn't me scrambling to get her attention. It was Olivia. She was the one feeling insecure, wondering if she'd gone too far. And for once, I wasn't the one chasing. At some point, Olivia excused herself, pulling Dylan into a quieter corner of the room. I watched them go, feeling an unexpected surge of satisfaction mixed with something darker, a tightening in my chest that I couldn't quite place. Isabella, who had been standing beside me, noticed the shift in my attention and touched my arm lightly. "You seem distracted," she remarked with a playful smile. "Just taking it all in," I responded, my gaze lingering where Olivia had disappeared with Dylan. Isabella followed my eyes, her expression sharpening as she read the unspoken tension between Olivia and me. "You and your wife, huh? Interesting dynamic," she said with an air of quiet curiosity. "You could say that," I muttered, lifting my glass to my lips. Isabella flashed a knowing smile but didn't push further, respecting my silence. She was astute enough to see there was far more to the story than I was letting on. The evening wore on, but I couldn't tear my focus away from Olivia. She was leaning in closer to Dylan now, laughing at something he said with an ease that made my blood boil. Her hand rested on his arm in that casual, too familiar way that only made her desperation more obvious. She wasn't just after Dylan's attention. She wanted mine, and she wanted it desperately. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't giving it to her. It felt like power. No, it felt incredible. As the night drew to a close, I could feel the shift in the air between us. The balance of control had changed, and Olivia could feel it too. It was a quiet battle, but I knew she was aware that the game was far from over. Still, for now, I held the upper hand, and I wasn't going to let go of it anytime soon. The next day, Jenna's call wasn't a surprise, but her words hit me harder than I expected. I answered, and before I could even speak, Jenna cut to the chase. "Liam, I thought you should know. I'm having dinner with Dylan tonight. Just the two of us." Her words felt like a punch to the stomach. The air in my lungs grew cold, my chest tightening in disbelief. I stayed silent for a moment, gripping the phone, my mind racing as I struggled to process what she just said. That French place on Ninth Street? I managed to ask, my voice tight. Yeah, Jenna replied, her tone tinged with guilt. I thought you should hear it from me. I thanked her, barely hearing my own words before hanging up. My mind was spinning. It wasn't just coffee anymore. It wasn't just an art show. This was a real date. She was going to dinner with him. No excuses, no pretense to soften the blow. I felt the weight of betrayal settle heavily in my chest. This was it, the moment I had been dreading, the one I'd known was coming, and I wasn't going to let it slide. Not anymore. When I arrived at the restaurant, I didn't rush inside. I stood outside for a moment, watching through the large windows. Olivia and Dylan sat at a small, intimate corner table, leaning toward each other, laughing too freely. She looked so at ease, so relaxed, like she belonged there. It felt like I was looking at a stranger. The woman sitting across from Dylan wasn't my wife. It wasn't Olivia. It was someone else entirely. I finally walked in, my heart thudding in my chest. The restaurant was quiet, dimly lit, with the warmth of soft lighting casting long shadows. I made my way toward their table, but neither of them noticed me right away. Olivia was too busy laughing, her hand lightly resting on Dylan's, her body turned toward him. I stood there for a moment, frozen, watching the woman I loved slip further and further away from me with every passing second. Then, Olivia looked up. Her smile faltered instantly. The surprise on her face was quickly replaced with guilt, the kind that told me everything I needed to know. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. I didn't stop walking. I didn't yell, didn't make a scene. I just kept walking, brushing past her as though she were just another stranger. Liam, wait, she called, her voice trembling. I didn't turn back. I could feel the eyes of every person in the restaurant on me, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to create drama. I was here for clarity, and I had seen everything I needed to. Dylan shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable, glancing between Olivia and me. He seemed to realize, too late, that he had put himself in the middle of something much bigger than he had anticipated. Hey, man, I didn't mean to, Dylan started, raising his hand in a futile attempt to calm me. I stopped and turned, my voice low and controlled, but with an edge that cut through the tension. You didn't mean to what? I asked, every word deliberate. You didn't mean to sit here with my wife? You didn't mean to be the reason she's lying to me? Olivia stood up, panic flashing in her eyes. Liam, please, let's talk about this. Talk about what? I snapped, my patience thinning. About how you've been sneaking around behind my back. How you thought you could just laugh it off and I wouldn't notice. Dylan raised his hands, trying to defuse the situation. Look, I don't want to get in the middle of this. You're already in the middle of it, Dylan. I shot back, my voice rising. You put yourself here the moment you invited her to dinner. Olivia stepped closer, her eyes wide with desperation. Liam, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. I cut her off, my voice sharp. I've seen the way you look at him, the way you act when you're with him. Don't stand here and lie to me, Olivia. Not now. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw something real in her eyes. Fear, but not fear of me. It was fear of what she was losing. Liam, please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But it was too late. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and sadness. Dylan remained silent, and his presence only reminded me of everything that had gone wrong between Olivia and me. I didn't look back. As I stepped out into the cold night air, the weight of the betrayal pressed deeper into my chest. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something else, relief. I was done. When Olivia came home that night, the silence between us was deafening. She entered quietly, her heels tapping softly against the floor, pausing in the doorway as if she wasn't sure whether she should come in. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of me. I knew we needed to talk. No yelling. No accusations. Just the truth. There were no accusations. No grand speeches. Just the truth hanging in the air between us, unspoken but undeniable. Olivia hesitated for a moment, standing in the doorway as though the weight of everything was pressing down on her, unsure whether to step inside or turn away. but she finally moved to the couch and sat down across from me. Her face was pale, drawn as if the weight of her choices had hit her all at once. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I exhaled, feeling the tightness in my chest loosen just a little, as if her words had unlocked something I hadn't realized was there. But the relief wasn't enough to erase the hurt. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. There were things we both needed to say, but they were too big, too raw to put into words just yet. The silence stretched out between us, thick and heavy. "I betrayed you, Liam," she said at last, her voice thick with guilt. "I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened, and I didn't know how to stop." Her confession struck me harder than I had prepared for. It wasn't the words themselves, but the raw honesty behind them. There was no pretending anymore, no masking the truth with excuses or justifications. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't something that could be brushed aside. It was betrayal. And somehow, despite everything in me telling me to react, I stayed still, trying to breathe through the ache. "You could have told me," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "You could have come to me when things started going wrong." Olivia's eyes dropped to her hands, twisting nervously in her lap. "I thought maybe Dylan could fill something I was missing," she said, her voice faltering. "But it didn't. It only made me realize how lost I really am." Her words hit me, but I didn't let them pull me under. Instead, I nodded, taking a slow sip from my drink, letting her honesty settle in the space between us. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. We couldn't keep avoiding the truth. "I'm not innocent in this either," I admitted, the words coming out slower than I expected. "I got so caught up in everything. Work, life. It became too easy to stop seeing you, to stop paying attention to what you needed." She wiped her eyes, though no tears had yet fallen. "I know," she whispered, her voice fragile. We sat there for what felt like hours, not speaking, just absorbing the weight of what had happened. It was as if the silence was a space for both of us to grieve, to mourn what we had lost, to figure out where to go from here. Finally, Olivia spoke, her voice softer now but firm in its certainty. "I think we need space. We need time apart to figure out what we really want." I paused, feeling the truth of her words sink in. "I agree," I said slowly, my voice tired. "There's no quick fix for this. It's too deep. We need time to heal, to figure out if there's anything left." She nodded. "I've been so caught up in trying to feel something again, trying to fix what I thought was missing, but it just destroyed what we had." For the first time, I felt a quiet sense of peace, not because things were better, because they weren't, but because for the first time in so long, I knew what needed to happen next. I needed to focus on myself. "I can't keep trying to hold everything together," I said, the words surprisingly clear. "I've been running on empty for too long. I need to find myself again, without all the noise." Olivia nodded, her face soft with understanding. "And I need to figure out who I am without us," she said quietly. "Without the idea of what we used to be." We didn't need grand promises or speeches. There was no hope for a quick fix, no illusions that everything would be okay overnight. But there was something honest in our acceptance. No more pretending. We talked for a while longer, but it was mostly logistical. Who would stay where, how we would handle telling the people who knew us. It was strange, the way the conversation had shifted from emotional weight to something almost practical, as if we were moving through the motions of what had already been decided. When the conversation finally ended, there was no dramatic farewell. No words that could undo the damage. We sat together in silence for a while longer. Olivia stood, gave me a small, sad smile, and walked to the bedroom. I stayed where I was, listening to the sound of her soft footsteps as they faded away into the distance. The next morning, she packed a bag. No grand gestures, no heartfelt goodbyes. Just a quiet understanding between us that this was the beginning of something else. Something we both needed, even if it wasn't what we had hoped for. In the days that followed, I started focusing on myself for the first time in a long while. I went to the gym, went on long walks without any particular destination, and reached out to friends I hadn't spoken to in ages. It wasn't easy. There were moments when everything hit me all at once, and I felt the weight of the past crash down. But slowly, I started to feel more like myself again. Olivia and I kept our distance. We exchanged a few polite texts, just enough to check in, but we both knew that things between us would never be the same, and that was okay. It was strange, knowing that our lives were heading in different directions, but there was a certain relief in it too. We were both learning to move forward on our own terms, even if that meant leaving behind what we had been. I never saw Dylan again, and to be honest, I didn't care to. He had served as a painful mirror, showing me the cracks in my marriage that I had ignored for too long. Olivia, in her own way, had learned something too, about herself, about what she needed, and about what she was willing to fight for. In the end, we both found what we were searching for, but not in each other. We found it within ourselves. And as painful as the journey had been, I knew it was the one we both needed to take. Life doesn't always give you the ending you want, but sometimes it gives you the one you need.